A voice smoother than gold and skin harder than diamonds. It's the rock and roll coup d'etat with Eddie Winters.
Oh yes, my name's Eddie Winters. We're back, and we've got a very, very special guest on the line. I'm very excited. He's a singer, he's a songwriter. Of course, he's the Billy of Dino, Desi, and Billy. He went on to be the unsung hero of the Beach Boys backing band in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Will you please welcome Mr. Billy Hinsche. Billy, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing great, Eddie, and hi to all your listeners.
Thank you. I gotta say thank you so much for being on the program. I'm so excited to speak with you. You've had such a crazy career playing music. Obviously, your connection with Dino, Desi, and Billy, and then obviously the Beach Boys and the Wilson family. I right off the bat, I want to just jump right in. You grew up in Beverly Hills. In the entertainment capital of the world. Were you always a musical kid? Did you grow up in a musical household?
I did, in the sense that my father especially encouraged my sister and me to learn piano, learn a musical instrument. So I was actually tutored from a really young age, probably 3 years old. I have a picture of me sitting at a piano. I was born in Manila, the Philippines, so
right.
That's where all everything started, obviously, and my musical interest then as well, because my mom used to say I used to listen very transfixed to the little turntable that we had, the little portable record player, that I'd really be intently listening to the little nursery rhymes and stuff that we had at the time. So to answer your question, that's where it really began, with early tutoring in the Philippines at a very young age.
And so piano was your first instrument?
It was. And then when we moved to Beverly Hills, I continued along those same lines. My sister and I both had piano tutors, and yeah.
And so at what point did you start to gravitate towards, say popular music and dare I say rock and roll as it was coming in?
Right. Well, similar to my listening to my records so intently when I was a little kid, I listened to the radio growing up, and I loved the local stations, listened to KFWB, KHJ, KRLA. Those are the three big ones. And of course, there was the pop music scene, the folk music scene, and the rock music scene, all having their respective air times when I was growing up, and I loved it all. And I remember at an early age, I was probably 7, 8 years old, I bought one of my first couple of purchases. 45s were Purple People Eater and Splish Splash and Baby Talk. Those are three of the ones I can remember buying. So I loved music, always have.
When you were playing with Dino, Desi, and Billy years later, you were playing guitar. How did you move to guitar? How did you pick it up?
Yeah, well, I should say first I gravitated to the violin. For some reason, I had an urge to learn how to play violin. So my father, being the guy that he was, who wanted to give my sister and I whatever we, really were interested in, lessons and things like music, I got violin lessons, and I got a beautiful violin, and so I learned sort of the basis of reading music and notation. But it was really when I went to Hawaii and learned how to play the ukulele. There was a beautiful woman who taught both ukulele and hula, and she had a little office at the Hawaiian Village, Hilton Hawaiian Village, and that's where I played and learned ukulele and learned the basic chords. Even though ukulele is a 4-string instrument and guitars are 6 or 12, I learned the basis for the guitar, which then led to my interest in the guitar, a number of years later.
At what point, I know that you met the guys, Dino and Desi, in grade school. You kind of went back way before you ever started playing music with them. Can you tell me a little bit about what your school life was like, going to school in Beverly Hills and meeting these kids who are had iconic parents.
Sure. Well, I went to Good Shepherd, Beverly Hills Catholic, and since actually kindergarten, and first grade, second grade, Dino came to school. So I already had been there a few years, and there are other children in my class whose parents were in the entertainment business. For instance, the Farrows, as Tisa and Steffi Farrow, Mia's younger sisters were in our school. Tisa was in my class. Hal Roach's children. Hal did the Little Rascals and the Laurel and Hardy series. The Hal Roach Studios.
Right.
I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Of course. You? Oh, yes.
So those young ladies were also in school and in class with me, and others. The McDonald Carey family went to school there. So, but I got to say that when you're that young, 5, 6, 7 years old, that the celebrity factor isn't so great in the sense that it isn't so prominent in your thinking or anything. You're kind of too young to even be aware of all of that. So when Dino came to class, came to school in second grade, which is 7 years old, I really didn't even put it together. Dino Martin, he didn't look like Dean Martin. He didn't, blonde hair, blue eyes. I just really didn't put it together for a little while. We were friends pretty much right away, until one day I asked him, "Is your father Dean Martin?" And he said, "Yeah." And it really came as a shock to me, I got to tell you. And, we became the best of friends. Like, I got to say that, when you say, well, he was my best friend, Dino really was my very best friend growing up. And we spent many, many, many hours, days, weeks, months, years together as best friends growing up. And then the Arnazes came to school a couple years later. Lucy Arnaz was in our class, and Dino's in my class, and Desi was a couple of grades younger. But at this point, Bob Crosby's daughter, Malia, was in the class, and some of the Hearst girls were also going to school there.
Right.
And, so, as I said, Jeannie Crane's daughter, Janine Brinkman, was in my class. So there were a lot of kids of famous people in that school. So it was really not that big of a deal, if you know what I mean. It was just sort of a natural thing.
Yeah, and you're in Beverly Hills, so that's kind of what comes with the territory, in a sense.
But see, we were really just knew the children. We didn't so much see their parents. You know what I mean? So their parents weren't so much in our upper consciousness as just our friends that we went to school with,
You're a young kid, and music is starting to become, as you grow older, you start kind of reaching out and branching out and listening to more music on the radio. And obviously when the Beatles and things like that happened in the British invasion years later, it probably had a big impact. How did you guys start to kind of decide, hey, let's play music together, let's jam?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, Dino and I were best friends, and we did everything together, whether it was ride our bikes or then our skateboards, and then, we had a go-kart, and, we played Little League together, and we did everything together, so it was sort of natural that we would do music together. I had a much more in-depth background than Dino did, and I taught him a couple of guitar chords, and we learned a few simple songs. And you're right, the British invasion was very impactful. The Beatles specifically, obviously, and then I just loved all those groups that came through in the British invasion. But let's not leave the Beach Boys out of the equation.
Of course.
Because they preceded the Beatles and the British invasion, of course. And so, I never stopped my interest in listening to music, and then when all this started happening with the British invasion and all, I started going to concerts. I saw the Beatles at the Hollywood Bowl.
Wow.
Yeah, twice. So I was a real fan. I really embraced the whole scene. And anyway, getting back to your question, Dino and I started learning a couple of songs on acoustic guitars, and then by and by we decided, well, if we want to branch out and get a little bit bigger, if you will, we should probably get a drummer.
Right.
And I'm not even sure whether Dino and I were playing electric guitars yet, but whatever. We approached Desi one day in the schoolyard playground, and we said, hey, you want to be in our group? And he was like, sure. You want to be our drummer? Yeah, sure. And we knew Desi was a really, really good drummer because during lunchtime one day, he had set up his drums in the hallway, and as we were returning from lunch break, he was doing like drum soloing in the hallway of our school. And Dino and I looked at each other like, what is this?
Right.
What the heck is going on? And then he went around to each class and did like a little drum, what would you call it?
Like a demo or something?
Demonstration. Pardon?
Right.
It was like he was really good. I mean, he had the best drummers in town as his teachers and instructors. So he really had a professional background as far as his training. So anyway, that's how we started our little band.
Did you guys consciously think about, well, should we learn songs of other people, or did you want to write music at that early of age? How did?
Oh no, we were a few years away from writing our own stuff, so we learned simple songs. I said because Dino and I only knew a couple of chords, so we'd learn things like Twist and Shout,
right,
which is 3 chords, and other songs that were friendly to the novice guitar player. And we sang, usually in unison, and maybe break off and do some harmonies. So we liked the harmonies of the Everly Brothers, Chad and Jeremy, and Peter and Gordon, and all those guys. So yeah, we just kept it simple. We might have done Gloria, a 3-chord song.
And how quickly did the band kind of evolve into? Eventually going and getting signed to Reprise, was it a very quick kind of turnaround?
Well, we practiced a lot. We rehearsed a lot. I like to say we were like so many other kids who put together a garage band in those days, except the only difference is we were rehearsing in Lucille Ball's garage.
Right. Which is incredible. I mean, it's just as a backdrop.
I know. It was actually a converted garage that had a little stage and a little, I think it was like a bumper pool table. It had been converted, to my memory. Anyway, Dino and I started off playing these 6-string electric, not very good quality guitars, at least mine wasn't, and through like 1 amp. I mean, it was really pretty lame. Desi had a nice, proper drum kit. And we rehearsed, and then when we got better and we had better equipment, we moved over to Dino's parents' house, and that was a little bit bigger of a setup. There was a little riser that was in the sort of the den / pool room / projection room, and we set up there, and we started playing a couple of little parties around town. Rory Calhoun's daughter, I remember, had a birthday party. She just lived down the street from Desi's house. And I think we made $20, and I said to myself, how are we going to split this 3 ways? So we got our chops together slowly, and then one day Dino called and said, hey, come over to my house, whatever. He said tomorrow or, next week.
Right.
We're going to audition for Frank Sinatra. And it was like, what? Okay. Now, once again, this is 64, so I'm 13. Dino's a little younger than me, a younger 13, and
Right.
Desi was like 12. So at that age, once again, at least for me, I had a sense of Frank Sinatra, who he was, what he'd done, but I didn't realize the depth and the breadth and the true meaning of who he was.
Right.
I knew he was a personality, and like Dean, I respected them, and I knew they were really big stars. But it wasn't until years later that I had a really full appreciation of their contribution and all that. So that's how that happened, and it wasn't until years later. Many years later, I asked Jeannie Martin, who was Dino's mother, I said, how did that all come about? That I never really knew, how we did that audition for Frank Sinatra. And she says, well, I called him. Oh. She said, well, you better come over and hear the kids. They're really good. And when Jeannie Martin says jump, you said how high, even Frank Sinatra. So that's how that happened.
I mean, it's incredible. And so you do the audition for Frank Sinatra, and he signs you pretty much right away. How I mean, that must have been kind of crazy because you're kids and you're getting a major label recording contract. Did any of that kind of did that dawn on you at the time of what kind of opportunity that was? Yes,
in our own young teenage brains, yeah, it was great. It was really huge. I had never heard of Reprise, and of course I knew Warner Brothers, but I learned a new word: subsidiary of Warner Brothers, Reprise, and great, And I guess these days it would be called a boutique label, but anyway, yeah, it was pretty amazing that we were fortunate enough to have someone like him mentor us.
I mean, it seems it's also because of the high profile of the label and obviously Frank Sinatra that this is the big time music industry. I mean, you guys went on to record in some of the big studios in LA, some of the top guys in the the session business playing on the records, and you're getting Lee Hazelwood and these songwriters like David Gates and Boyce and Hart. It's kind of it must have been. I mean, looking back now, I mean, it's kind of like a full-fledged. You're one of these big LA pop groups. How did you handle going from the garage to stepping into basically being a celebrity yourself at such an early age?
Yeah, well, thank you for acknowledging that we were one of the LA bands that came out of LA at that time, and that's a great history of bands, and we played a small role in that, and thank you for acknowledging that.
Absolutely,
and that means a lot to me. It legitimizes the group because we did work hard at our craft, if you will, and we did go out on tour with the Beach Boys and Sam the Sham and the Raiders, and we were a real group. So it was pretty darn incredible. Of course, in retrospect, even more so in a way because we weren't thinking about the great writers. We didn't really know who that Lee Hazelwood was such a great writer and would continue to write so many great songs, not only for Nancy Sinatra but for Dean Martin. He wrote Houston, and anyway, we weren't so concerned or even aware to think of the great David Gates, as you mentioned, and we had Bonner and Gordon, who wrote for the Turtles.
Right.
And we had
great.
Boyce and Hart, and gosh, we just were very fortunate. It's just everything lined up just perfectly for us.
Was there ever a concern, say, from your parents about you getting involved in the music business at such an early age?
Well, their concern was that we continue our education, and they were all very strict and serious about that. Lucy and my dad and Jeannie, they were all like, oh no, this isn't going to be one of those showbiz horrible nightmare stories. We're going to keep the kids grounded. I mean, the contract that we signed with Reprise was signed by Lucy, Jeannie Martin, and my dad. I mean, we weren't even old enough to sign a contract.
That's right, of course.
Yeah, so they kept us firmly on the ground in that sense, and I salute them for being the good parents that they were.
The group, again, like I was saying before, it was very high profile. You started to appear on a lot of big concert bills. Like you mentioned, you played with the Beach Boys and Sam the Sham. And of course, you're making these TV appearances. Was that kind of was there a learning curve for you to just, again, going from the garage to now being on television and being a recognizable figure?
Well, I'll tell you something that happened that it was like, whoa, really? Like, as far as the learning curve, when we got our contract and we picked the demos, we picked from the demos that they brought us a song that, we in those days they had acetates.
Right.
You know what that is?
Of course, yes. The demo records.
So acetates were brought to us with, and people had demoed songs that they had written or somebody had recorded and sang and blah, blah, blah. We finally settled on one that, the Beatles took a pass on this one. We'll do it.
Right.
The fact that they even heard it, Now, whether that was even true or not, it didn't matter.
Sure.
But we recorded that song. It was called We Know. And then I picked a song that I'd heard on a Searchers album called Since You Broke My Heart, which, once again, going back to the notion of I wasn't aware of who wrote it. It was written by Phil Everly. Like, no wonder I liked it, because it had two-part harmony. Anyway, we were told, the recording session is on Friday, and you're welcome to come down. And we were like, what do you mean we're welcome to come down? We're playing on it, right? Oh, no, we have real musicians playing on it. What do you mean? We're real musicians, And so that was sort of a rude awakening that we weren't going to be playing on the record, and we had no idea that that's how it worked. So we did, that was part one of the story, but then part two, we did the Hollywood Palace show. Now, mind you, this is 64, still in black and white, because 65 color came in 65, and the song went nowhere. It tanked. It didn't, I like to say it shipped cardboard. It went nowhere. And so, that was a rude awakening, and so we went back to the drawing board, and that's when they brought in Lee Hazelwood, and he brought in I'm a Fool, and that was our biggest hit still to this day. And but yeah, we did every show. That led to doing the Ed Sullivan Show, which was, the biggest show around at that time.
I'd heard that that wasn't your first appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show. Is that correct?
That is correct. That's a kind of a bit of trivia I'll tell you about quickly. Remember I said how my dad would always have my sister and I do things that we found an interest in. One of the things that he wanted us to learn was how to swim. That was very important to him. So we went to Crystal Scarborough was her name. She had a swim school on Robertson and in L.A., and we learned to swim. And so long story short, Esther Williams showed up one day and was picking children to do the Ed Sullivan Show with her in Vegas.
Wow.
And she picked me amongst others. I think we were called the Water Babies. And her point of her segment on the Ed Sullivan Show was, look at how young these children are, because they were even little toddlers. I was probably 5 at the time, 6. And so, I have photos and footage of it. You mentioned my filmmaking. I've got a documentary called Home Movies, in which you can see me swimming with Esther Williams.
That is incredible.
I know. So and it's funny because I now live in Vegas. The Desert Inn is long gone, and so because that's where we did the show. So yeah, that's true. We did the Ed Sullivan Show. I did this Ed Sullivan Show twice, and the Ed Sullivan Show that Dino, Desi, and Billy did was the first Ed Sullivan Show in color.
Wow, is that right? I did not know that.
Well, part two of that, it was a historical event, if you will, in TV for Ed Sullivan's, because it did not emanate from New York. It emanated from L.A., that show. And so as a result, Desi's mom was in the audience. Actually, she was in the audience for the Hollywood Palace show, too. So I want to thank her for her support showing up to both of those shows, being in the audience. So, yeah. And we did Shindig. Remember Shindig?
Oh,
that was in black and white, so that was 64. We did Chivalry, Hullabaloo, Where the Action Is, 9th Street West, Sam Riddle, and I mean, I'm sure I'm forgetting a few, but those are the...
You made the rounds, really. I mean, you were on all of the shows of the time, of the era.
Yeah, we were very in demand.
Being such young kids and getting signed, and obviously you're mentioning, the studio musicians coming in and the songwriters. Did you guys have much control over the direction of the group or any say in the creatively at all?
No, not really. I mean, these were the days, when the record companies really kind of ruled everything, like the movie studios, controlled their artists.
Right.
No, we didn't. We didn't pick the artwork. We didn't. I mean, Lee Hazelwood started writing us some songs that were, and they gave us sort of a rougher edge. It's like, no, we're not rich kids from Beverly Hills, which was, of course, the immediate thought that was attached to us. But we're like sort of like the rebel kind. he wrote a song for us called "The Rebel Kind," and sort of was like making us more dangerous, which was funny because we weren't really dangerous at all. So no, we didn't have any creative control in that regard at all, other than we picked. We got to pick the songs that we did in the sense that Lee would bring over the Billboard Hot 100 and Cashbox, those trade mags, and we would look at the Hot 100 and pick the songs that we liked. Dino would pick a couple that he wanted to do, and I picked a couple that I wanted to do. Desi wasn't really singing, so Dino and I pretty much controlled that part of it. And then they'd cut the tracks and we'd sing. So in that sense, we controlled the set list, the playlist. And then Lee would bring in some original material, and but we were grateful because he was such a great writer.
I mean, it's kind of amazing too, because you're surrounded by a lot of talented people, and of course you're getting asked to be on big bills, and of course, as you mentioned, in '65 you guys were asked to tour with the Beach Boys. Do you remember the first time, I guess, meeting them and talking to them? I think it was a specific show. Was it the Hollywood Bowl?
Yeah, July 3rd, 1965, Hollywood Bowl sound check.
What was that like? I mean, you must have been kind of bowled over by seeing these kids.
The fact that we're playing the Hollywood Bowl,
right?
I mean, like I said, I'd seen the Beatles there, and now I'm going to be on that same stage? Oh, my God, That was incredibly exciting in and of itself. But then we found out who else was on the show. Sonny and Cher, the Righteous Brothers. Bill Medley's a friend to this day. And, I suppose if I saw Cher, I wouldn't hesitate to walk up and say hello and reintroduce myself. Let's see, Sir Douglas.
Wasn't the Kinks on that show as well? Is it?
The Kinks, the Byrds.
Wow, jeez.
I mean, it was really something. Donald Lauren. It was an incredible bill. So yeah, well, we were just, gosh, I think probably my dad drove me down. I mean, we weren't old enough to drive.
Right.
65. I'm 14 now. So it was very exciting to meet them because they were on top of the world. They were, the Beatles were, getting there, but the Beach Boys were certainly America's number one biggest band ever, right?
Absolutely. They are already established.
Yeah. And it was a gorgeous sunny day, and The guys just were fantastic, really nice. Of course, Dennis had his shirt off, and he and Desi hit it off right away. The two drummers, Carl and I, hit it off right away, and Mike and Al were also there. Super nice. In fact, they were like, "Do you mind using our amps tonight, so we won't have to switch over to your amps?" And we was like, "Are you kidding? No problem." They had, like, now we're playing through the Beach Boys amps.
Right.
Like, does this get any better? So it was a thrill.
So meeting them, I mean, did that performance kind of lend itself to getting the gig a year later, touring with them? How did all of that come about in that relationship?
Actually, it was pretty much right after that. They liked us so much, and we went over so well that they took us on a little tour to Bakersfield, Fresno, and Hawaii. And the other act on the show, she opened the show, was Barbara Lewis. You remember her?
Of course, right.
Baby, I'm yours. Baby, I'm yours. And, boy, that was fun, because in those days, the guys were still wearing their pinstripe shirts and
the white pants and the
white pants. And I like to say, those days we were still running to the limo to get away after the show. It was crazy, but we loved it. Absolutely loved it.
It's somewhere in this timeline here. You guys are playing with them, and obviously this is probably the point where you're kind of getting to know these guys and become more friends. And at what point did your sister Annie kind of, I guess, start dating Carl? Is that all around this same very time?
Shortly thereafter, yeah, because Carl and I did become close. Could say the two guitar players, and we both played 12-string Rickenbackers, and we just had lots of stuff in common. But Carl and Annie started dating in '66, and they were married, shortly thereafter in '66.
So
or maybe they dated in '65 and married in '66. Not quite sure about that, but
right.
They for sure were married in '66.
I mean, obviously that only just brought you closer with the Wilsons and getting to kind of, you're spending a lot more time with them. I read that you were also in '65. You got to attend one of the party sessions for the Beach Boys album that came prior to the Pet Sounds record, the Party album. You were on Mountain of Love? Is that right?
Yeah. Do you know what I did on that song?
I'm not sure. Tell me. What did you do?
It's crazy. I played harmonica. For crying out loud.
And were you a harmonica player at the time?
Well, actually, I was, because with Dino, Desi, and I, or DD&B, as the magazines ultimately, I think Gloria Stavers from 16 Magazine started just abbreviating our name for the covers because, well, everybody knows who DD&B is. I had, in keeping with the times and the way, Bob Dylan, John Lennon were using these harmonica racks that you wear around your neck, and you look like you're wearing a retainer or something.
Right.
And I took to learning to play the harmonica, which I found, fairly easy. I figured it out pretty quickly, and so I had a knack for the harmonica. So I guess I had brought my harmonica with me. I don't know, but I ended up playing harmonica on Mountain of Love because Carl would bring me along with him to sessions. The three of us, Carl, Annie, and me, we would go to Carl's sessions, and oh man, it was so much fun and exciting. And I already had my own studio experience. In fact, we shared some of the same studios as they did. United and Western. They were both almost side by side. They're separated by, I don't know, a couple 100 feet on Sunset Boulevard right there near Vine. Anyway, yeah, so lucky me to have played on the Party album on Mountain of Love.
I mean, they were just getting better, and obviously Brian's writing was blossoming. Even as early as 64, 65, they were really starting to really take a stride in their own music, and you getting to kind of get a passenger seat view of all of this stuff must have been quite thrilling. Also paralleling with your own career, what What was it like going to these kind of these sessions? Was it kind of did you kind of take it for granted at the time, or were you really like, this is pretty a special moment?
Oh no, I was agog. It was just fun and good, clean fun, and with the professional aspect to it. But I learned a lot watching the engineers and watching Brian produce these songs. And I remember going up to his home on Laurel Way, not Laurel Canyon, big difference. Laurel Way was off of Coldwater in Beverly Hills, up in the hills, where he wrote Pet Sounds. And so I was, right in the thick of it. I remember seeing a chart he had a grand piano, and he also had a Hammond B3, and I'm pretty sure I saw the chart for California Girls on his organ that he had written, because he was quite adept at writing musical notation.
Right.
And boy, it was really fun to have a ringside seat to that, and really it was family. Some people could have called me the fourth Wilson brother, which I don't mind at all.
Well, getting back to the Dino, Desi Billy story, by the 60s, 66, 67, you're talking about, you've been on reprise for a while, you've been releasing these records, and as you mentioned, Lee Hazelwood kind of helped with getting you those first couple of hits, but you guys kind of were struggling a little bit to get another follow-up hit. How did that affect the group? I mean, obviously the band didn't stay together many, many years later. What was the emotions like for you guys kind of trying to get another follow-up hit?
Well, it wasn't that stressful.
Right.
Well, we just kept recording stuff, and it wasn't as exciting or as much fun as I'm a Fool was, because that was top 20, and I got the trades, and I enjoyed looking at the standings every week, and did it have an anchor, did it have a bullet, what chart position is it in, was it last week, and all that stuff. But we had 6 songs that charted, so we did okay. I'm a Fool, Not the Lovin' Kind, that Lee wrote. I ended up writing a song with Brian Wilson called Lady Love, which was our last song. We did 4 albums, by the way, with Reprise. Went to Columbia for a year, released a single, went back to Reprise. So it was like from 65 through 69, 70 when the group was active. But, we just kept plugging away and touring, and, till finally, the contract wasn't picked up, and that was the end of the line, and everyone had their different interests at that point. So it was all kind of a natural progression.
Well, I had heard, and I don't know if this is a rumor, but at some point, maybe in 68 or 69, did the guys in the Beach Boys offer a role in the group to you?
Yeah, that's true.
You didn't take it, obviously, but was that because of school, or was that because of your parents?
Yeah, all of that. I wanted to take it, and I was really heartbroken, really, when my parents and they wanted me to finish college, and actually the guys were shocked to hear that I had taken a pass on it, but understood and were supportive of Billy wants to go to college,
right?
And but yeah. So the thing is, that was to be a full member too, by the way. But I got the best of both worlds, is how I have to look at it, because I did go on to UCLA, get a motion picture television degree in film and TV, and also got to tour, because I was sort of like when I was in high school, because of our schooling, we couldn't go on tour if we were in school, so our tours were like on the weekends, and so as to not interfere with our school. So similarly, when I was going to UCLA, I would go out with the guys, with the Beach Boys, when I had a break. I was playing a variety of instruments for them. And then when I graduated in 74, I was committed full time to them.
Absolutely. I mean, and what's interesting, and you mentioned it, you went to school for film and TV work, and I want to get into it a little bit more later, but this is also the time where you're bringing along cameras when you're doing these tours with the Beach Boys. How did that kind of come about? How did you start to kind of get in that mindset of a filmmaker and shooting, just everyday scenes backstage?
Yeah. Well, it was a function of I had to declare a major at UCLA. I hadn't committed to a major in particular. I had gone to the music department and was like, whoa, their curriculum was so difficult. It was just like, wow, I don't know whether I need to learn how to play Mary Had a Little Lamb in every key.
Right.
You know what I mean? Just,
right.
Or to score a large manuscript musical score or this and that. But when I went to the film school in the theater department, it was like, oh, wow, here's a recording. Oh, here's a TV studio. Oh, this is comfortable. Yeah, this feels like home. So I committed to the motion picture television division, and then I had to do some projects. I had to do a thing called Project One and a thing with a video class, Portapak, which was the precursor to all these video cameras that everybody has in their phones and everything else. The Portapak was a handheld, larger camera with a coaxial cable attached to a recording device that you would sort of carry on your shoulder, like a big tape deck, with videotape deck, reel-to-reel. I think it was half-inch. And so I had the bright idea of incorporating making documentaries, essentially, of my work. That would allow me the best of both worlds, once again, to tour and to capture those images on tour and then bring them back to class, edit them, and there you go. Voila, there's my Project One, and there's my Portapak project.
Was the guys in the group, were they accustomed to you always having the camera around, and was your classmates kind of jealous that you're bringing back all of this great footage of the Beach Boys?
Well, the boys knew because they knew I'm going to college.
Right.
I'm not with them, but now I'm doing both. So, no, they were very cooperative, some more than others, but they knew I was doing projects for school. This wasn't any kind of, trying to make anybody look bad.
Right.
It was just day-to-day life. And my classmates, some of them could have cared less. The Beach Boys in early 70s were not sitting on top of the world anymore. And so they were, some circles considered passé. So, yeah, that's how it was.
But rewinding a couple of years, because, you brought up a good point, because at that time, obviously the Beach Boys, they kind of had suffered a little bit of, times had changed, the psychedelic era, all of this kind of, different music was happening at the dawn of the 70s. And, of course, the Beach Boys, after Pet Sounds, Brian got into the Smile sessions, and that record was abandoned, and obviously 2020 and other records came out after it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but were you present for some of the Smile sessions? Did you sing on Heroes and Villains or on a part of that? Is that correct?
I did. Thank you for doing your homework.
Oh, my pleasure.
I did. I call it the bicycle rider section.
Oh, right.
Where it goes to a E minor, well, whatever, E flat minor, whatever. Bicycle rider, just see what you done. Do 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 do. And if you listen carefully, they've remixed it on a couple of different versions, but the single version you could clearly hear my voice. And Brian, had asked me, hey Billy, go out there and sing this part, and I was like, sure, And boy, he mixed that part up really loud, and I was very grateful for that. But yeah, I was there for most of it.
Is that right?
Recorded at Brian's house in Bel Air. He had moved from the Laurel Way home in Beverly Hills to Edgar Rice Burroughs' home in Bel Air, which was, the author of the Tarzan series.
Right. And this is when the Sandbox was in his house.
No, the Laurel Way house was the Sandbox house.
Okay.
So yeah.
But you were present during these sessions. There's so much mythology and folklore the album is surrounded by, and this is kind of also where a little bit of the disagreement in terms of the Beach Boys' direction, started to happen because the music was so advanced and not what was happening in popular music. Were you privy to seeing a little bit of that kind of tension within the group with this music?
Not so much. I didn't witness that, but what I witnessed was them recording, guys singing on the parts, all of them, and then we toured that stuff, and we played it on the road. We played Heroes, and we played some of the more eclectic things. I know not Let the Wind Blow wasn't on the Smile sessions, but it was just on the periphery of that era. In later years we did Vegetables, so we did Surf's Up. That was challenging because I had to play the piano.
Oh.
And Brian, that was written in the sandbox at Laurel Way. So no, to answer your question, I didn't really witness firsthand any political problems within the group, though there may have been. I never saw it.
And so you jumped in and out of the band, I guess, while you were in school, but you really didn't become a full-time member until, what, you said 74, is that right?
Right. That's when it was like, okay, I'm done with school, but here I'm, full steam ahead.
And that is, which I find fascinating, because, by 74, the Beach Boys had really kind of become the biggest touring act again in the country. I think Rolling Stone gave them, the top band to see, and you guys were doing huge concerts, and you were having really huge stars opening up for the Beach Boys at that time. What was that like to kind of jump in full steam ahead in this big, both feet in, to now being one of the biggest selling acts of the year or of the time?
Yeah, well, let's go back to the 60s. I like to say everyone has opened for the Beach Boys.
Right, of course.
Because when I was hanging around with Carl, because sometimes I'd go on the road with him just for fun, to hang out, not to play or do anything. And, I saw everybody from Strawberry Alarm Clock to the Spiral Staircase to Buffalo Springfield.
Wow.
To, acts like that opening. And then that was, like I said, the 60s. And then there was a downturn. And then when I was still touring through the early 70s, don't forget. I was with them for like this turnaround, sort of like went from playing smaller venues, and then it really exploded 74, 75 when the double album came out.
Right, The Endless Summer, which was, huge record.
Yeah, I remember Carl saying, God, it went gold, and then it went platinum, I believe. And so that turned it around big time. And then Jim Guercio appeared on the scene, and he really helped guide the group back on track. And then we were, then it was the stadiums, and the only act that at the time that we ever opened for was Elton John at
Right.
Wembley Stadium. And the big Wembley Stadium,
Right.
not the little auditorium Wembley. But, and that was the show where, tragically he miscalculated, and he had, I like to say, it's, very difficult to follow the Beach Boys. But he closed the show, but he'd opened with, I think, his new album was at the time, The Bounder Cowboy. He opened with Funeral for a Friend, and it was really like a bummer. People were like, what's this? And leaving. He was very upset about that. But, that was 75. And then 74, 75. And then we did the Beachago tour, which I like to say I gave that tour its name. And that, we traded. We alternated opening, and each group alternated headlining. So it was a fair, deal where somebody opened one night, the next group would open the next night. So that's when things just blew wide open. We were playing Madison Square Garden for several nights, in the Capitol Center, and D.C. and Chicago, Soldier Field. It was, wow. That was still to this day my most memorable and fun tour of all time.
Talk about some incredible experiences. What was your role in terms of the band? Because you play guitar, you'd sing some songs, you'd sing lead on a couple songs, you'd play keyboards or piano. How would you define your position in the group at that time? Because you did so much.
I guess you could call me the utility man.
Right.
Because I was sometimes one tour I played bass.
Is that right? Wow. Jeez.
Which was really challenging, but
And how did these decisions get made? I mean, each tour obviously would be different, and you choose different songs for each night.
Yeah.
How did that work? Within the band.
Well, there would be a set list, and then there would be minor changes over the course of a tour, and then we'd burn out on one song and replace it with another, and I guess as an example, we might do In My Room, In My Room, In My Room, and it's like, okay, enough of In My Room, let's do Surfer Girl, because it was a ballad also, like In My Room, or other songs became sort of interchangeable. Those were decisions made by Carl, Mike, Al as well. Just everybody collaborated, but primarily Carl.
You bring up Carl. At this point, a lot of people have written about how Carl kind of, after Brian's absence for a while, Carl really started to step in as I don't want to say leader, but he kind of stepped in and started to make a lot of the bigger decisions. Is that kind of an accurate statement?
Yeah. Oh, and it would be okay to call him the leader.
What was the because going towards after the Chicago tour, there's the band is so huge profile as a draw, and then cut to the studio, and the records kind of seem to not meet the expectations of the audience as much as, say, like the Greatest Hits record. When we get into the later albums of the late 70s, they didn't have the same impact. How would you characterize that era of the band? Because they were so huge live, and then the albums were a little bit different.
Yeah, I don't know. That was their own journey through artistic expression or
right.
Whatever. Brian started to get back more involved, and they let him run with his ideas. And, they had to step up. I mean, Carl on Surf's Up, he was writing more, and he collaborated with Jack Riley, lyricist on Trader and Long Promised Road and Feel Flows. And so, I'd say there was some experimentation going. But that was a popular album. But I know what you mean. Some of the lesser ones. I don't know. You mean like probably MIU
and the LA the Light album was, which I think is one of the is like a hidden gem.
I love that album.
It's a great record. So getting into this, moving forward into the 80s. I mean, you stayed with the band. You were doing such high profile gigs, and then at some point, Carl leaves the group, and you assisted him doing his solo records. Can you tell me a little bit about working with Carl, just you and him on these solo albums?
Sure. Well, he wanted to try something different, and he wanted to go express himself in his own unique way, and he found a group, or maybe the group found him, but through a mutual friend, they probably would say it was Jerry Schilling, who was Elvis's guy. And he started recording stuff up at Caribou with Jim Guercio up in Colorado. And so they put that first album together called Carl Wilson. And then Carl asked me if I would like to be in the touring band. And I said, sure, I would love to. So we did that for a bunch of tours. We opened for the Doobie Brothers and played solo, but a lot of little clubs, and quite different from the Beach Boy experience. It was a lot simpler, a lot more, scaled down, and but then Carl wanted to do a second album, and he asked me if I'd like to go up to Caribou, where he was now living, and do some writing. Well, he'd never asked me that before, and gosh, I'd known him almost 20 years at this point. And so I had some songs finished, half finished, and in my head. And so we went up there, and I started playing them. And he said, "What else you got?" I played him another one. "What else you got?" Finally, I played a song. He said, "That's the one." And then Jim Guercio was also there, and I played it for Jim, and he says, "Yep, that's the one." So Carl's producer on the second album was Skunk Baxter.
Oh, wow. From the Doobies, right.
So Skunk got like the best creme de la creme of musicians and singers in L.A. I mean, he had Timothy Schmidt and Burton Cummings, and the list is long of the people that contributed vocals to that album called Youngblood. And Carl recorded my song called One More Night Alone.
Right. Great song, by the way.
Thank you, which was a ballad. And I played piano on that. That was my only on-album participation. But, wow, what a thrill. And to hear it, all I heard was the track. You know, I did the basic track, and then that was it. And I went away. And then the next thing I heard was the finished product, and it just, I remember, Walkmans. You remember those?
Oh, of course, right.
I remember hearing it on a Walkman, and it just nearly took the top of my head off. It just, it was incredible to hear that for the first time.
You know, I meant to ask this earlier, and I wanted to talk a little bit about Dennis Wilson, because going back a few years, probably about a decade before in our timeline here, you were hanging out, obviously, with the guys, and you were good friends with Dennis. And back in, 68 or 69, as the story goes, Dennis actually brought you to meet Charlie Manson. Is that correct?
That is correct.
I have to hear the story. Can you tell me a little bit about what it was like meeting Charlie Manson?
Well, first of all, where did you hear that?
I think it was on the internet.
Oh. Well, Dennis had been living with, or I should say, there were some people that were living with Dennis that he told me about, and a lot of girls, and their guy, their leader. You got to meet them all, and so I went out there and met everyone, and the next day I met Charlie. Dennis and I were playing music in his living room, and he had a pump organ, and turned around, and there was this guy standing there. And, "Hey, Billy, this is Charlie. Hey, And Dennis had him play some songs for me, because Charlie was a would-be songwriter. And, they were odd songs. He had an okay voice, I guess. But I was a little wary of him. Look, this was 68. Nobody knew who he really was.
Right, of course.
What was going to happen. So this was all, what can I say, just,
hindsight, the kind of, when you're looking back at it now, you're like, oof, that was the guy.
And it got to the point, let's put it this way, where I felt, you know what, I don't need to be around these people anymore. It just isn't my scene. And I never went back to Dennis's house, and then they eventually moved, and that was it. So
did you and Dennis ever kind of share a conversation after you'd heard about the Manson murders and this thing? Did you ever talk about, like, wow, we kind of dodged a bullet here?
Not really. He didn't want to talk about it. It was almost like we didn't even have to say anything. It was just like, whoa.
Yeah, right.
What is this all about, So no, we never really talked about it.
Well, moving years later, by I think it was 83 when surprisingly Dennis had passed away. How did that impact you? Because that must have hit you very hard, because he was such a close friend, family member, and such a shock. What was that experience like?
It destroyed me.
Is that right?
Yeah, it really. It was very difficult when I heard the news. was, and just the aftermath of dealing with it, to this day, it was not good.
How would you characterize, Dennis, the Dennis you knew?
Oh my gosh, he was incredible. You just wanted to be with him and go out and hang with Dennis. You knew it was going to be fun. It was going to be exciting, probably a little dangerous, but it was going to be a blast. And he was like a big brother to me. He was my big brother, and I learned a lot from him, and a lot of great memories. And it was sad to see his decline. And very loving soul, so talented. A real ladies' man.
Right, of course.
I wrote a song for him called "One in a Million," and actually that's took me 20 years to finish that. I just couldn't finish it for some reason, and I finally did. I think it was because we were coming up on the 20th anniversary of his passing, and I wanted to have it done, and I made a short movie and put his images to that film and to the music, and actually you can see and hear it on a documentary I did on Dennis called Dennis Wilson Forever. In fact, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to direct our listeners to my website.
Absolutely.
And you can see trailers and read about the various films I've done, one called Carl Wilson Here and Now, interviews with all kinds of folks that knew him, and then one called 1974, from that era of which we referred to earlier, the Portapak video movie that I did, and other films. So if everybody wants to go to billyhinsche.com, you can find all that stuff there. Or go to my Facebook page. I have all that stuff actually currently up and available to view. So
yeah, there is some great stuff in that. You're never going to see this anywhere else other than from your website. And it's a staggering amount of, if you're a Beach Boys fan, you're going to love the material there. It's quite incredible. I wanted to, talk about a little bit about the 80s time with the Beach Boys, because at that time, they were firmly placed as a part of the fabric of America. They're performing in Washington, D.C. On the lawn and doing, these big, the 25th anniversary of the band was happening. You guys played, I believe, in Hawaii or somewhere with Ray Charles and the Everlys, and you're doing these high-profile gigs. What was that era like, after, Dennis had passed away and you guys were kind of, putting the band kind of back on track and celebrating, this 25 years or going into 30 years of the band? What was do you have any great memories from that time?
Oh yeah, no, you're right. That was in Hawaii with Ray and the Everlys, and that would have been like 25th anniversary would be 86. It was the thrill, but by this point, Glenn Campbell was on that show.
Of course,
Linda
right.
Carlisle, who was married to a friend of mine, Morgan Mason, was there, and she asked me to help her find the right note for the bridge of Wouldn't It Be Nice. She was struggling with that a little bit, and Ray Charles, right-hand man, asked me if I would work with Ray to help him learn Sail on Sailor, and I was like, are you kidding? Would I want to work with Ray? Of course, my gosh. I got to work with him on that, and Good Vibrations, which he also sang on that special. And Three Dog Night are old friends, and they did Darlin'. Danny Hutton was Brian's best friend. It was just a thrill, and that was and to think that was the 25th anniversary, and now it's been the 50th anniversary.
I know, exactly.
Who knew?
Only a couple of years later, the group had the hit with the Kokomo on the Cocktail soundtrack. And did you didn't appear on that record, or were you with the group at that time?
I did the video.
You are in the video, okay.
Yeah, we did it at the Grand Floridian on the Disney World property. Our buddy John Stamos was playing congas. So no, I wasn't on the record per se, but I certainly toured at that era and was in the video.
It's got to be crazy to be in the group for, being associated with the group for so long, and then having this breakout hit.
Well, it was #1 worldwide.
Right.
Wasn't it? It was great. It was good for business.
Right. And
it
so,
was one of those things where the planets just lined up right. It was Tom Cruise, it was a hit movie, and it was Kokomo, and just everything fell into place on that one.
everything kind of lined up.
Yeah.
I was going to say, also during this period in a different kind of, subject matter, this is also in an era when, Brian was kind of away at the time. Did you see a lot of Brian? Because I know that he was hooked up with Eugene Landy at the time. And did you ever have any kind of contact with Brian at that time?
Yeah, I've had over the years contact with Brian sporadically, and I just finished touring with him. Speaking of which, in June we did Hawaii. Oh. We did a public show and a private show, and we've been doing Pet Sounds and Greatest Hits as part of the set list. So, yeah, I've been connected with Brian all along.
Well, take me into the 90s, because you continued playing and doing projects and doing records, appearing on records and touring. How did the group, you've been with the group for so long, how did you see the group evolving, going into the 90s, a different era? Did you look back at that and think about, how the band had changed and just overall over that long period of time together?
Well, it was just like they're just the rock and roll veterans at this point.
Right.
They're inducted into the Hall of Fame, and they just had such an incredible wealth of songs to choose from that they were an institution.
I do want to ask you, because Carl was such a close friend and such an integral part of the Beach Boys, and he passed away very young. And it can't be understated how important he was. How did that affect you? Obviously, it must have affected you very deeply.
Carl, we knew he was sick, and it took about a year from the time he was diagnosed to the time that he left us. So, you say, oh, I had time to prepare, but you can't really prepare yourself for when it actually happens. With Dennis, it was just boom, over, With Carl, there was sort of a little bit of time to just get comfortable or used to the fact that, he was sick, and didn't really want to accept that he might die, but in fact he did, and it was very, very sad, It was a terrible thing. He was a great man, and as you say, he was quite young, 52, I think. But he lives on in his music and in his children and his grandchildren.
You've put out a few solo albums, and you mentioned also getting the opportunity to tour with Brian Wilson's group, kind of being back on stage. How are those experiences for you, getting to do all of this again, still to this day? What is that like for you? Is it still a thrill for you?
Well, it's the greatest thing in the world. I knock on wood that I am still doing these incredible songs and, have the opportunity to go places and do all the things that I can, and just still doing what I love best, playing music. It's incredible. I'm very blessed, as they say, and I know that, I'm just very grateful for every opportunity I've had since day one with the guys.
Right.
They're family to me.
Billy, I want to thank you so much for, lending us your time and kind of going through your history. It's quite just a fascinating story, and you're such a great artist, a beautiful singer, a great performer, and I can't thank you enough.
Well, thank you for taking the time to chat, and it's been fun for me to go down memory lane here with you, Eddie,
Right.
and maybe we can do it again sometime.
I would love that. Well, thank you again, Billy, and all the best. Hopefully we'll see you soon.
Okay, buddy.
You got
Bye
it.
for now.
Take care. There he goes. Billy Hinsche.